Hello, I'm Mario Anderson, and welcome to In Focus Kentucky, where we take a look at issues that matter to you right here in the Bluegrass State, and we'll talk to the lawmakers, community organizers, and people like you who help shape those policies. Today, we're focusing on the new cigarette tax law passed recently and the overall status of health in Kentucky. According to America's HealthRankings.org, Kentucky is ranked 42 out of 50 in overall health measure in the United States, and one of the biggest reasons for that is the amount of citizens who are smokers. About 24% of Kentuckians are classified as smokers, meaning they currently smoke every day or most days of their lives. And to combat this, health advocates lobbied for a $1 increase in cigarette tax in the last legislative session, but a 50-cent increase was decided on by the Kentucky legislators. And joining me now to discuss this new tax is Kentucky State Senator Julie Rocky Adams of the 36th District out of Louisville, Kentucky. And Adams is also the chairwoman of the Senate Health and Welfare Panel. Thanks so much for joining us here on In Focus Kentucky.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, set the stage for us with this particular topic and the cigarette tax that is now law. How did all this come together?
Well, as you know, smoking has been such a huge legislative issue over the last several sessions. Kentucky has one of the highest rates of smoking. You mentioned 24%. I've even heard it mentioned at 27%. So we do have, it is a significant problem for Kentucky. As you know, smoking not only lowers the health outcomes, but it also costs the state a tremendous amount of money through our Medicaid programs. So it's nothing new. We've been trying to talk about this mostly in terms of putting in a smoke-free ordinance, statewide smoke-free law. That has not happened. We did make some progress last session with a smoking cessation bill where we are now covering smoking cessation products for everybody, whether you're in a private health plan or a Medicaid plan. Now fast forward to the session that we just finished. And there was huge discussion on how do we lower the rates of smoking in Kentucky. Research has proven that if you put a $1 tax on cigarettes, that you can really deter people from starting smoking, and because of that tax you can really see a lot of decreases in the amount of smokers. So we thought that was a prudent way to go forward. Tremendous amount of lobbying that went into this. Actually, I think that one of the top expenditures for lobbyists this year was the smoking industry, trying to combat this $1. We agreed on a 50-cent tax on cigarettes. That's going to generate, they say, about $270 million for the state budget. Obviously, those are declining revenues because you hope to see positive effects from that. But the truth is, most of the health advocates don't think that a 50-cent tax on cigarettes is really going to prove to be the right policy because it's not cost prohibitive, and their research has shown that it really doesn't decrease the amount of smokers in a state.
Well, on that note, what's your view on that? Is the 50 cent was enough to do the job, or is this just a starting point for the conversation? Or?
In my opinion, it's a starting point for the conversation. I was advocating for $1 a pack because I thought that the research backed up the claims that we could decrease the number of smokers in the state of Kentucky. And in turn, when you decrease the number of smokers in the state of Kentucky, that saves the taxpayers dollars. I mean, so I think it's really a conservative type of approach to wrapping your arms around this, this health problem that we experience in the state. You have to have policies that I think are fair, and you also have to keep the taxpayer in mind. And they're spending a tremendous amount of money. They say that every filer in the state of Kentucky spends about $1,200 to cover smoking-related costs in the state of Kentucky.
Now, this law was signed by the governor back in April, but when will it take effect?
So the new laws always take effect around, I think it's July 15th, depending on what day of the week that it falls on. But July.
So with that being said, any new goals that you would like to see potentially expand, whether it's a short-term goal or long-term goal in addressing this particular issue?
Yeah, and I think that, like I said, 50 cents is a great way to start, but I don't think that it quite solves the problem that we're looking at, that we're facing. And so I think that we can expect next legislative session to continue the conversation on, let's see what this 50-cent tax does. Is it moving the needle at all? Do we need to raise it? I think that we're going to be looking at those data points pretty closely.
Obviously, smoking a hot topic issue in our state of Kentucky, but you're chairwoman of the panel, the Senate and Welfare Panel. So what are some other issues that are on the horizon that you would like to see addressed?
Well, we do have a couple of things. As you know, you hear the proverbial, Kentucky is at the bottom of every list we should be at the top of. Diabetes is a huge concern for citizens of Kentucky. Heart disease, we have some of the highest rates of cancer in this state. And surprisingly, some other issues are really bubbling to the top. That we're seeing a lot of maternal mortality increases. We're seeing those types of issues kind of rise above, and so we're going to be tackling some hepatitis issues, some tracking maternal mortality, tracking child mortality, and trying to wrap our arms around some good data so that we can make some good health policy decisions in this next legislative session.
And on that note, with the opioid crisis and conversation that is happening across the country, but here in Kentucky as well, what are some of the potential plans in place to continue to address and tackle this issue here in Kentucky?
Yeah, and I think that we started out addressing that issue a little bit on the criminal justice side of things, and what we were seeing is that a lot of women who we were incarcerating were actually pregnant, and they were also addicted to drugs. And so what we tried to do in that instance is move these women, rather than incarcerate them, move them into a treatment program so that they could step the baby down so that they could deliver a healthy baby. And then they also had the opportunity to then be clean and keep their family intact. So I think that what we're starting to do is look at our problems and figure out creative approaches to them, because just incarcerating our way out of that problem we're not going to solve it. We've got to have bigger ideas and open minds into how we start to combat, in particular, the opioid epidemic that our state is facing.
And also on In Focus Kentucky, we've talked about several issues, including the medical marijuana debate and whether or not that's something that the legislators will be able to address potentially in this upcoming 2019 General Assembly. So thoughts on that particular conversation and what it could do for Kentucky?
Absolutely, and I will tell you that issue has been one of the biggest grassroots issues I've seen move through the legislature. I get calls and emails all the time about medical marijuana. There's a couple of different ways that people talk about marijuana. They talk about it in terms of end of life. So could you pass legislation that only deals with marijuana relative to end of life? Then you hear about marijuana relative to just medicinal purposes. And then you hear about marijuana spoken of in terms of recreational. And so depending on what advocacy group is communicating with you at that time is if it's recreational, medicinal, or end of life. And I think that it's now reaching a critical point, and I have offered to do hearings on that topic, and so that we can start to talk about is Kentucky ready for it, or is Kentucky not ready for it.
Well, Senator Adams, we really appreciate you joining us on this topic of the status of health in Kentucky and being a guest on In Focus Kentucky.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, coming up, we'll speak with the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky to learn more about their Smoke Free Tomorrow campaign. Next on In Focus Kentucky.